The Accidental Prime Minister, Chapter 6. Help! Joe, his mum and AJ left the house via the back door to avoid the crowd, but what actually happened was a chase through the back lanes and cramped gardens of London, Joe in his best shirt, Joe's mum in her hat and coat, and AJ in a fluster on the phone. No, I said abandon the interview. My client can't make it. He has to go to Downing Street. How many more times? Have you been drinking? Don't you use that language of me. Oh, well, that's charming, isn't it? Same to you. AJ hung up. I've cancelled your appearance for Mr. Tumble on CBeebies. A black car pulled up at the bottom of the side of the street. Perkins? A voice from the car boomed. Yes, said Joe. Hop in. The PM is waiting. This car is bigger than our house, Joe's mum muttered as she climbed in. The car was cool and quiet inside. The seats were black leather and more comfortable than the most comfortable sofa. It even had a TV, and not one of those where you can only watch a Doctor Who DVD, but a proper telly with all the channels. Hey, look, it's us, said AJ, pointing at the screen. Sure enough, they were on TV, being filmed from the sky by a helicopter. Underneath, the caption read, Perkins off to Downing Street for showdown talks. Look at the crowds, Joe! Mum squealed. The streets ahead were teeming with people. They must have all been watching the TV too, because it seemed that from every house all around, people were spilling out onto the street to see Joe. We're never going to get there at this rate, the driver said gruffly. Is there a sunroof? AJ asked. Stevens is the name, sir, and yes, there is. And there must be some sort of sound system too, right? Yep, there's a speaker on the roof and a microphone in the armrest, but it's only supposed to be used in an emergency, Stevens added. This is an emergency. I've got a plan. AJ's eyes lit up as he lifted the mic out from its hiding place. Slowly the sunroof opened. There was a hush from the crowds as they realised that something was about to happen. Suddenly, AJ's head and shoulders popped up, clutching the microphone. Hello, everyone, AJ yelled. Are you all in the mood to break some records? Yes, they all yelled with a mixture of excitement and confusion. Good. Here's what we're going to do. You lot go to this side of the road and you lot go to the other side. AJ gestured with his hands and the crowd parted down the middle, allowing room for the car to drive through. Now, I want to see those hands because we're about to do the world's biggest high-five-a-thon. AJ yelled. But you don't want just me high-fiving you, do you? No, they all yelled. Who do you want? AJ said, cupping his hand to his ear. We want Joe, they yelled in unison. You want who? AJ's many years watching Punch and Judy shows hadn't been wasted. We want Joe, came the response, twice as loud. AJ leant back in the car. Come on, Joe, AJ smiled. Let's get high-fiving. I find it tricky, Joe said nervously. Last time I high-fived someone, I gave him a nosebleed. Oh, you'll be fine. Just hold your hand out. Come on, your adoring public await you. AJ grinned. Joe took a deep breath and poked his head out. The noise was so loud, it was like someone throwing a bucket of applause all over you. At first, Joe was overwhelmed, but then he looked over at AJ and Mum, who were also hanging out by the sunroof by now, and suddenly the nerves began to melt away. Joe for PM! Everyone was yelling over and over. AJ, Joe and his mum all yelled out their hands and they high-fived the cheering crowds as they went. Joe felt a wave of happiness come over him. Not because of the limo ride of a lifetime or the fame, but because he felt like finally he was going to win at something. He was going to see the PM to save the park and his mum's job. A short while later, the three of them arrived at 10 Downing Street. Mum and AJ got out the limo, followed by Joe, who lost his balance and fell out. We should have brought some fig rolls, Mum said anxiously. Why? Joe asked. You should never arrive at someone's house empty-handed, Joe's mum insisted. Mrs. P, we're here for showdown political talks, not a children's tea party. Right, everyone, game face on. AJ's right, Mum. Let's say no to everything at first. Show them we mean business, Joe said determinedly. The door of number 10 Downing Street swung open to reveal a grey-haired gent in half-moon glasses. Ah, Master Perkins and family, I presume, said Jenkins wryly. No, Mum yelled before grinning and nodding knowingly at Joe and AJ. My mistake, the old man said, and the door slammed shut. Joe and AJ looked again at each other and then at Joe's mum. AJ knocked on the door again. It was the same old gent. Hello, I'm Joe Perkins, Joe said. No, he's not, Mum yelled. Mum, we don't have to negotiate this bit. Let AJ and me do the talking. I'm Jenkins, the old man said. No, you're not, Mum yelled. Sorry, old habits die hard. Before they knew it, Jenkins had whisked them through the front door and the hustle and bustle of outside disappeared instantly. They were standing in the hallway of a grand house with high ceilings and plush thick carpet. Nice pad. AJ gave a cheeky little wolf whistle. Thank you, we try, Jenkins sighed. The Prime Minister will see you now. Jenkins led the three of them down a wide corridor to a huge office. There sat Percival T. Duckholm behind a desk with Violetta standing next to him. Duckholm chomped on his 5th Scotch egg of the day. Oh, you're here, are you? He said, spitting sausage and egg crumbs everywhere. Yuck, children, Violetta sneered. We must get this place steam cleaned ASAP. Mr. Prime Minister, sir, Joe started. I just want to say I'm sorry for losing my temper yesterday. I was just trying to save the park. You see, my mum works there. I know why you're here, and you can save me the sob stories. I've heard them a million times on TV in the last few hours. Frankly, I'm sick of the sight of you. It's not easy being Prime Minister, you know. Truth be told, it's a nightmare from day one. The coffee machine doesn't work. You'd think the Prime Minister would be able to get a decent cup of coffee. Wouldn't you? And someone keeps pinching all the best chalky biscuits. I think they do it on purpose because they don't like me. I see the things they write on the toilet walls, you know. The Prime Minister is a poo-poo head. I see them all. Well, stuff them, I say. I never wanted to be Prime Minister anyway, and I wanted to be a train driver. Maybe I still can be. Either way, I'm off, said Percival, standing up and grinning insanely. What? Joe said. What? Violetta hissed. Here, sign this and you can have what you want. Duckholm thrust some papers at Joe. You're going to save the park, said Joe, grabbing the papers and signing them immediately before the Prime Minister changed his mind. Joe looked at AJ and his mum. They'd won. They'd done it. What do you mean you're off? Violetta asked. I've had enough. I've had enough of him, Percival pointed at Joe. And I've had enough of you, he yelled. Violetta tried to smile. Smiling wasn't something she'd ever really done before, but she gave it her best shot. Well, about time. I mean, your country thanks you for your service, etc., etc., but really you should have handed over power years ago. Violetta pulled out a tape measure and started to measure the curtains. Well, they'll have to go for start. Wait a minute, Joe muttered, looking more closely at the papers he'd just signed. That's not right. It doesn't mention anything about the park here. I don't know why you're measuring the curtains, Violetta, Percival said, tucking into yet another Scotch egg gleefully. What do you mean? Said Violetta. This doesn't make any sense, Joe said, scratching his head. It says here that I'm the... Because you're not going to be... Percival began. Prime Minister! Shouted Joe. Violetta looked at Joe. Joe looked back at her. They both looked at Percival. What? Joe and Violetta yelled at the same time. You heard. Anyway, I just did as you said, Violetta. I gave him what he wanted. You idiot! Violetta shrieked. You've made him Prime Minister! What about me? I would have made you PM, Violetta, but there was one thing that kept getting in the way, Percival snorted. What? Your personality. You're a horrible person. I mean, I know I'm pretty obnoxious, but you, Violetta, are the most ghastly person that I've ever met, and I'm a politician, so as you can imagine, you're up against some tough competition. But I thought you were going to save the park. I thought that's why I was here, Joe shrieked. Once you're PM, you can save the park. You can do whatever you want when you're Prime Minister. But I don't want to be Prime Minister, Joe cried. I do, Violetta cried. Serves you two right. Who says Percival T. Duckholm is an idiot? The only downside is I won't get to watch the fun as you two have to work together. Violetta, meet Joe, your new boss. And with that, Percival T. Duckholm started to laugh. And the parks, they fall under the Deputy Prime Minister's department. But isn't that... Joe, meet the Deputy Prime Minister via letter. Percival laughed again, only louder this time, spraying semi-digested Scotch egg everywhere. Have fun, you two. I'll send you a postcard from train driver school. And with that, Percival T. Duckhorn ran out of the room, tooting like a train as he went. Joe looked down on the paper with his signature on. Perhaps Percival was joking. I mean, you know how some grown-ups think they're funny, but actually they're not. Perhaps it was one of those occasions. This can't be happening! I can't be the Prime Minister! Joe shouted. That's not what it says here, Jenkins says, snatching the paperwork from Joe. All the colour drained from his face as he looked up solemnly at Joe. Welcome aboard, sir.